This is a quick comparison of the Razer Kiyo Pro up on the top and the Logitech C922 on the bottom. The Razer Kiyo Pro is set to 1080p 60 frames per second. The Logitech C922 is set to 1080p 30 frames per second. Now, the reason this video is going to be kind of short is because I've done an in-depth comparison of the Razer Kiyo Pro to the Logitech C920. The only difference between the C920 and the C922 is the C922 can also do 720p 60 frames per second to get some more smoothness. I'll demonstrate that shortly. But first, let's go ahead and look at these webcams individually. Here I have the Razer Kiyo Pro. I do have studio lights on, and I'm going to be showing the C922 with studio lights, and I'll also be showing them with just daylight, so you'll be able to see that. And I'll demonstrate the HDR on the Kiyo Pro also. Right now it's at the default 80 degrees field of view when you just plug it in, but I'm going to go ahead and show a little bit of the 90 and the 103 field of view as well. Now, as far as the sharpness of this device, for a webcam coming out in 2021, it's not really sharper than the C922, which is like super old, so not impressed at all with that. It is pretty smooth. It is at 60 frames per second, and the colors look quite good. The background is really good. It's actually the color of the wall that it actually looks like. My skin tone's really good. The problem that I have here with the colors are my shirt is like kind of like this orange red, which looks fine if you've never seen this shirt before, but in real life, this shirt is more of like a crimson, like fire kind of red, but it doesn't really translate over to the Razer Kiyo Pro. I did buy the Razer Kiyo Pro for its launch price of $200, and if you are interested in the device, I'll have a link in the description. But let's look at the Logitech C922. Now, this is the Logitech C922, and it is a lot choppier than the Razer Kiyo Pro, and you'll see this definitely with movement, but this is at 1080p 30 frames per second. So we're going to go ahead and put it to 720p 60 frames per second, so you can see if that smoothness, how much of a difference it makes. You'll see that it's a lot grainier in the background. You'll notice this at full screen a lot more, especially because I have a 4K monitor, and you're really going to see all that grain back there just kind of flying around the screen. I like the red that it has on my shirt. It's closer to what it looks like in real life, but my skin tone does have some like extra red kind of popping in there where there should be brown, and it is just undersaturated overall, but the image is pretty good. I think it's respectable. It's not like amazing, but it's pretty standard. The sharpness is on par with the Kiyo Pro, which is kind of embarrassing for Razer, to be honest with you. Webcam coming out in 2021 versus one that was in like 2013 or something, and this has the same sharpness as the Logitech C920, which is even before that. Now, I bought the Logitech C922 for like an inflated price because you know how the pandemic has been, but it was like around like 120 or something dollars like that. For current prices, I do have a link in the description so that you can check out what the current price is. All right, now we have both webcams head to head again. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to demonstrate the different fields of view on the Razer Kiyo Pro and demonstrate the HDR. Okay, so what you were looking at before was the 80-degree field of view on the Razer Kiyo Pro, and now I've set it to the 90-degree field of view. And in Razer Synapse, this is called medium. This is what the device looks like. It does start bending the sides of the frame quite a bit, like especially like at the diagonals, you can really see that. So this is what it looks like at medium. Let's go ahead and turn it to the 103 field of view, which they call wide. All right, now we have the Kiyo Pro at the wide field of view. This is what the device is gonna look like. And now we have the fisheye effect that's like super extreme. Not a fan of it at all. And I don't really think it's worth it. And yeah, so I just don't use it. I always use it at its default narrow field of view because when you just plug it in, you don't have Razer Synapse. That's just what it's going to default to. And the Logitech C922 is locked at a 78-degree field of view. All right, now I've turned the field of view back to normal. I've turned off the studio lights. I'm going to demonstrate the HDR on the Razer Kiyo Pro. So let me go ahead and show that. So now I've turned off the studio lights and I just have light coming in from the window and I'm being lit from behind. And this is not a good way to light your shot. You should almost always have your brightest light source in front of you unless you're trying to do like some sort of cinematic effect. But anyway, this is as good as I can make each of these webcams look at manual settings. And I'm either going to be way too dark or the background is just going to be overexposed. And a lot of times you'll end up with both anyway. But the idea is the Razer Kiyo Pro, you can set HDR on and it will be able to manage both of those. So let's go ahead and turn HDR on the Razer Kiyo Pro. Now I have HDR activated on the Razer Kiyo Pro, but it did mess up all my manual settings and we have like this rainbow effect, like chromatic aberration everywhere and like this distortion like down here. So let me go ahead and fix that. Now I have HDR on the Razer Kiyo Pro and I've improved the manual settings. So now you can see that I'm lit up quite brightly and the background is not overexposed. It's actually a pretty cool effect, but I did lose a lot of the smoothness now. Now I have about the same smoothness as the Logitech C922 at 1080-30 because this effect does turn the Razer Kiyo Pro effectively into a 1080p 30 frames per second webcam because every other frame is stitched together. I'm not really a fan of the HDR if you can help it, but if there's no other scenario and you're just like in some sort of like an office space where you just can't change the lighting, well, the HDR effect is pretty cool. And now I'm going to demonstrate the 720p 60 frames per second on the Logitech C922. So let me go ahead and change the setup and switch the lighting around. And now I have the Logitech C922 at 720p 60 frames per second. And now we can compare the smoothness, and we have that equal even smoothness on this device. So is this worth it? Well, let me go ahead and blow this up to full screen so that you can really see what kind of a difference in sharpness you get. So right now, this is what the Razer Kiyo Pro looks like at full screen. This is 1080p, 30 frames per second. And let's go ahead and switch over to the C922. C922, 720p, 60 frames per second. So we do have a lot more smoothness, but we lose a ton of sharpness, and it just, to me, doesn't look that good. I look like I don't even have freckles anymore, and you can't like read words on anything anymore, even though you might not necessarily want the background to even be that sharp. I'm not a fan of it, but if this is something that you're really interested in, this is something that the Logitech C922 can do. Now, the last thing we're going to do is a quick audio test. Now, this is the audio coming directly from the Logitech C922's microphone. I'm a little bit more than arm's length away. That is not ideal placement for a microphone, but this is also a webcam, so you kind of got to work with what you have. I do have a little bit of sound coming from the computer that is down here. It is the fan noise, so if you can hear that, that's what it sounds like. Now this is audio coming from the Razer Kiyo Pro. This is what this device sounds like. Same conditions, got the computer fan going on down here, and there's no filters on or anything like that. So this is just the audio straight out of the microphones from this device. And now we switch back over to my main microphone. This is the Razer Siren Elite. I really love this microphone. I'm going to be doing a lot of reviews and comparisons and stuff like that on this microphone in the future. Now, as for my verdict on these devices, yeah, the Razer Kiyo Pro does look better. The colors overall are better, though I do like the reds a little bit more on the Logitech C922. I think there's a little bit too much orange on the Kiyo Pro, but everything else, the background, like the white balance, my skin tone, it's really good on the Razer Kiyo Pro. I like that there's a whole lot less grain in the image than the Logitech C922. I like that you can get 60 frames per second at 1080p, something you can't do on the C922. You just drop it down to 720p, which is on right now. I'm not really a fan of it. $200 is what I bought the Kiyo Pro for, though, and I think that is kind of overkill, especially when you can buy the Logitech Brio, which I do like a little bit better because it can do 4K. It is quite a bit sharper, but it's really a judgment call. If you're willing to spend that much money on a webcam, but you don't care about 4K, then the Razer Kiyo Pro is a super good option. It is probably the best 1080p webcam on the market right now. Personally, like I said, I would skip the C922. I would say just buy the much cheaper C920. And then when you're ready to upgrade to something, bigger and better, then maybe the Kiyo Pro, maybe the Logitech Brio. But that in-between step, the C922, I just don't see the value proposition using the 720p 60 frames per second on it. I have links to both of these devices in the description, and I'll see you in the next review.